Welcome in, everyone, to Flyover Footy. Not, I would say, honestly, Santi, probably the most down match of the Critchley era. I don't think that's a surprise or a hot take, but we're here nonetheless, talking about a 1-0 loss to Houston Dynamo, and we've got a positive at least, right, Santi, to take away from this before we get not to give away the spoiler for the pod recording, but there is a positive that we will be talking about.
Yeah, at least something to talk about, but yeah, very disappointing game.
Yeah, so we'll let the chat build up. We'll let some folks join, and then we'll get going with our pod recording. But this one's tough. This one's a tough one to digest because, like we said before we started, it feels like one step forward, two steps back, and it's tough to want to look into anything too deep other than this was an aberration and it was a learning experience for the team, I guess. Because there really wasn't much in the way of the attack, especially, which was a hallmark of the Critchley team, and what he had been implementing. That was the thing that we could hang our hat on so far. Is our attack was not marginally, but significantly successful compared to what it was under Olaf Melberg, and this game was very much a step back in that direction. So,
The game.
Santi, you ready to you want to just dive right into this one?
Let's do it. Let's keep going.
Let's talk it through. Let's talk it through. If you're joining us on the live stream, hop in the chat, ask us any questions. We'll talk to them because truthfully, there's not a lot of specific things to discuss in this one. We'll get through all the big stories, the good, the bad, and the very much ugly on this one. So hop in the chat, ask us any questions you have about this game or in general. Like if you have things you're wondering about the season, about MLS, now's the time. All right, Santi, you ready? Let's do it. Welcome in, everyone, to Flyover Footy. My name is Matt Baker, joined as always by my friend in soccer, Santiago Beltran, for another flyover fallout. This one, a 1-0 loss against the Houston Dynamo by St. Louis City, and it was one step forward, two steps back from David Critchley's side. It was an attack that was reminiscent of Olaf Melberg's tenure. It was a defense that was probably the step forward. In fact, it was by only allowing one goal. It was one of the better performances that we've seen from Critchley's side, and we're going to get into that and so much more. So I welcome in Santiago Beltran, who's on the call for this matchup. Santi, how you doing? And what are your first thoughts on this one?
Doing great, Matt, but just disappointed. It's a game that was there for the taking. Houston didn't show much and ended up winning it with a goal on the second half. And yeah, defensively, the team did okay. Roman Berkey had another great performance, but it's just the team didn't create anything with the only shot on goal coming towards the end. Imagine if that had gone in and the team will have rescued a point.
That would have been something. We probably would be having a very different take about the team gritting it out, about the team not giving up and fighting it out until the very last moment. But as it is, that isn't the case, and so that's not the narrative that we have. So we'll start like we usually do with the starting 11, and there's a lot to take away from this starting 11. That is for sure. It was a 4-2-3-1. Roman Berkey was in net, no surprise there. But the back line is where the story of this match is for St. Louis. Jay Reid, Jake Girdwood-Reich, Michael Wenzel, and Joey Zielinski made up our back line. It was the first time ever that we've seen this back line. It was the first time we've seen this back line pairing. It was the first time we've seen Michael Wenzel in 2025 for a start. And it was the first time we've seen Jake Girdwood-Reich at center back. So we'll circle back to this in just a second, but the rest of the 11, in addition to Berkey, Reid, JGR, Wenzel, and Zielinski, was Alfredo Morales and Conrad Wallem in the midfield. No real surprise there, given availability. Celio Pompeu, Marcel Hartl, Simon Betcher, and Klaus up top. A traditional-looking attack from what we've been seeing from Critchley, where Betcher plays on the right mid role and Klaus plays up top. That was not surprising. And like I said, in the midfield, again, no surprises because of the availability. No Eddie Leuven, no Chris Durkin. You have Thomas Ostrak available, but with JGR playing a center back role, he wasn't available in the midfield. And we know that Conrad Wallem is probably your center back, your central midfield option when Leuven and Durkin are not available. That is what it is. No Akil Watts, which is the only other option. And we'll get to the fact that we saw a lot of Akil Watts in a minute, but this seems like a response to last week's match, or the midweek match rather, where Akil Watts did not have a good performance, to put it lightly. And so you bring in Alfredo Morales to start. You have Conrad Wallem at least able to go 45, which is something we were projecting and hoping that he would be available to do, given his brief appearance in the midweek match. So what are your first thoughts on this 11, Santi?
I like the back line. Young guys, obviously first time playing together, but it gave me like a small glimpse of what the future could be. You have to play the young guys, especially if things are not going well and you don't have a lot of players available. Seeing JGR as a center back, that's something we have been wanted to see. We have been wanting him to get first more minutes, and second, see what he could do at that center back position. So I like it. I like it that we get an opportunity to the young guys, and then midfield. That's what was available, but I had a concern with Wallem just because he was coming out of an injury, and we knew that he wasn't gonna last more than 60 minutes. It ended up being just 45, but based on what was available, that's what the team had to do. One thing that caught my attention was that Janis Horn was on the bench.
That's right.
I knew he wasn't gonna be used, so that's one of those things that leaves me thinking, like, why don't bring a guy from City 2 at least to give him the experience to travel, to train with the team during the week? But in the end, Janis Horn was the guy that was chosen.
And that brings up a good point. So, I want to get back to our starting 11 in just a minute, but that does bring up a good point of what's the purpose of rostering Janis Horn. David Critchley was pretty honest about not wanting to play him, saying he likely wouldn't see time. He wants to focus on guys who are going to be here. So if you're focusing on guys who want to be here, why even do that? There are plenty of City 2 players, defensively especially, who you can use a short-term loan. We're not limited in the number of short-term loans we can make in any given season. Last year proved that. I think we might have topped MLS in the amount of short-term loans that we offered, both in volume of players and number of short-term loans per player. But the idea that you're going to roster a player like Janis Horn when you've said you're not going to play him, and obviously you didn't, whether you needed to or not, I think is beside the point that I'm trying to make. It's the concept of follow through with what you're saying. I have the utmost respect for David Critchley, and he's given us really no reason to be overly critical about his role as an interim head coach. There's a lot of conversation about whether he should be the permanent head coach, but he's doing a fine job so far. Result on Saturday notwithstanding, even with that, there are a lot of positives to take away. I haven't had any concerns overall with his choice in lineups. I think he's been brave with some of his choices. He's made unique choices, and he's thought outside the box from a lot of positions that city managers have put this team in, whether it was John Hackworth, Bradley Carnell, or Olaf Melberg. But this one really, and not to harp on it too much, but it is frustrating because you do have some of the players for City 2 who they played Houston Dynamo 2 last night, and they gritted out their own win. But the idea that you could be giving some of these players an opportunity to at least be rostered, travel with the team, like that's significant experience that you could offer some of the young players, whether it's a fullback, a center back, however you want to look at it. Orozco could have been rostered again. He has 4 opportunities to do that. I think he's been given 1 so far.
Yeah.
You could put Cam Silly in there. You could put a defender who was on the bench who didn't see time for City 2 on Saturday. There are a lot of options, and it would at least it would keep continuity to what you've said, but it would also provide an emergency option if you needed him still. And that's what Horn was, I think. On this roster, he was an emergency option at the very most. You had no desire to play him and didn't want to play him. A Jay Reed injury isn't even guaranteed that you would have seen Giannis Horn because of the way we saw Akil Watts used. It's likely because of that kind of a move that we saw that Giannis Horn was the second or the third or fourth rather option at left back, an emergency only where you wouldn't want to play him because he's on his way out and he just signed a new contract with Rapid Wien. It's frustrating that occurred, and that's something I hope to see different. And just because you need to fill out a roster slot doesn't mean that you put the guy in that you have on the roster, but have no desire to play him.
Yeah, considering how the game developed and Alfredo Morales' injury, maybe having another center midfielder will have been a good option. Again, as an emergency, last resort. But I don't know. I just didn't like the fact that Giannis Horn was there instead of using someone else. And yeah, you could say availability, a lot of injuries, but again, bring a guy from City 2, give them the experience. That's part of their development too. So
and
Aaron, didn't like that.
Yeah, Aaron Link in the chat mentioned City 2 played last night, and I addressed that, but the fact that City 2 played doesn't preclude you from bringing a honest here. I mean, cards on the table, it's City 2. There are priorities for this organization.
I agree.
Ahead of City 2. You can and should prioritize City and experience with City and the entirety of the roster before you think about what City 2 needs. Like, that's the concept of the team. That's the concept of the league. It's a reserve team. It's City 2 for a reason. And I think Tyson Pierce could have also been an option here. You could have. The fact that City 2 played, that doesn't mean anything to me as far as a guy that couldn't have been brought up. So that's all I think we'll harp on with that. But I do want to circle back to the actual starting 11 because Jake Girdwood-Reich, let's focus on him for just a second. This is the positive. So not to bury the lead any further, but I think Jake Girdwood-Reich is the one positive. You could look at JGR and Michael Wenzel as the positive pairing here of this game. It was Jake Girdwood-Reich's first ever start at center back for St. Louis City. He played the role for Sydney FC in the season prior to his signing. So if you're not familiar with JGR's history, we signed him to a U22 deal last season in the middle of 2024. Contract was announced, I think, in June. He joined the team in July for an $800,000 reported transfer fee that we reported, and we're able to confirm that. And he never played center back for St. Louis up until now. He played center back in his last season with Sydney. We assume this is where he landed on St. Louis's radar because he played it for the entire season. And I'll go straight to JGR's quote on his positioning post-game. He said, I actually think, I think most people actually forget that I'm more of a center back than a 6. I played there mostly back in my old club, so I was happy to be given a chance at center back tonight. Straight from the horse's mouth, JGR considers himself more a center back than a 6. And we've seen flashes of, I would say, a modicum of brilliance at center mid, but center back, we really saw JGR shine. This was a pleasant surprise for a lot of fans because it was viewed as scraping the barrel of our depth when you have JGR, a player who has been rostered for about a year, and given all the center back issues we've had, has never been considered an option, even in relief up until now. And so now to finally get that opportunity, he shines. Some of the stats on JGR do back up this notion where he led the team in touches with 83. This is significant for a team that tries to build out of the back, and he didn't have many, if any, turnovers based on his possession, and he had 66 of 68 accurate passes. So this isn't a center back that's being asked to progress the ball up into the attacking third. He's staying within himself, but he's doing what he's asked to do. He's doing what he needs to do, and he's doing the job that he has at center back. In a 2 center back look, he's supposed to stay deep. He's supposed to stay wide when we're building from Roman Berkey, and he did everything that he needed to. There wasn't any, set piece goal scoring brilliance, but that's not what you're asking for your center backs. And for JGR to now show that he's not only capable, but can actually perform well in a center back role against a Houston team that overwhelmingly won the field tilt battle, a hallmark of what Critchley looks for his team to win. Houston won that battle, and JGR withstood everything. He had the good positioning. He did what he needed to do in the box. This was a good performance, objectively, by Jake Girdwood-Reich.
I agree, and what you mentioned, the set piece, then moving the ball around, that could come with time. It was his first start. He has not played center back in a long time, but yeah, he looked okay to me. It's another good option there. We were talking before the game, maybe him starting as center midfielder, but then we got the surprise of him starting at center back. But it was a good surprise. He performed well and playing with Michael Wenzel, something we have never seen. It was a new pairing. Wenzel himself getting his first start of the year. It was a good performance overall for those two.
And it was necessary. You know, we were out Henry Kessler, Timo Baumgartel, Joachim Nilsson. The only center back options on this roster, Kyle Hebert, Josh Yarrow, Michael Wenzel, and as it turns out, Jake Girdwood Reich, who we now have to call a center back, center mid. We can discard the entire narrative of he played center back for Sydney and hadn't seen time with St. Louis. So at least we have that. You mentioned Michael Wenzel's first start of the year. That was good to see. Overall, a good performance by Wenzel. There were very few things that I think you could point to. Even the goal. We were talking before we started recording that the goal that was allowed by St. Louis that we'll get to in just a little bit. If you look at the replay, you do see Michael Wenzel there as the man who potentially had coverage of the player who scored. There were a lot of things that went wrong on that play. There was a lot of ball watching. There was a lot of players standing around and waiting for something to happen. There was a lot of that zonal marking flaws that we talked about before. So overall, Michael Wenzel, I think, had a good game himself. David Critchley post-game on this rotated defensive lineup that saw the first ever pairing of Michael Wenzel and JGR said, quote, "I take the idea that two of our younger lads, JGR and Michael, who haven't been given a lot of opportunities under my tenure so far, both stepped in. Both I thought were very good on the defensive side and had good moments on the ball as well. But I was very happy for those two young men coming in together as well as a new partnership and competing well. So I was very, very happy with their two individual performances." And I think that's where it starts and stops for positives in this game, honestly. Like not to tell you to tune off of the rest of the podcast, because please stick with us. But that was it. And honestly, in an away match in MLS, where MLS, we've talked about this plenty of times before. We've talked about the stats. We've talked about the win percentages. In general, historically speaking, this season, last season, over the course of the history of MLS, Major League Soccer is one of the most difficult leagues in the world to win away. The stats back this up. And for St. Louis to go in and lose 1-0, objectively, it's not that bad of a result. It's not something that you would, in a bubble, write off and say, "Oh, that was just a really bad loss." Like you can't go into an opposing field and have that showing. Teams do it all the time. So objectively, it's not a bad loss. However, however, and I love that GIF from that referee from City Park at the time.
Yeah.
I will take that one to my grave in how appropriate that can be in any given situation, including this one. However, the way that we lost here, and in context of how this team had been playing the past 3 or 4 games, is horrifyingly frustrating. It was just the one step forward was defensively in allowing one goal and allowing it the way that we did, allowing really few overall opportunities and outperforming our expected goals allowed. So the expected goals for Houston Dynamo were in the 2.0 range, and we allowed 1 goal. So objectively, it was a better game defensively than we had been playing. But offensively, the thing that we said we hang David Critchley's hat on, terrible performance. Absolutely horrendous. To not get a single shot on target until stoppage in the second half, to not have a single shot until stoppage in the first half. It was bad. And not just bad, but Santi, I think we lost a player in this match. And I think we lost a player for a significant amount of time. So before we really go into the stats on the performance, we have to address Alfredo Morales. Alfredo Morales went down at the 9-minute mark trying to win an aerial duel. He came down hard on his shoulder area, his right shoulder. And as we're hearing it, obviously there hasn't been an announcement. There hasn't been information given. There might not have even been significant scans, but just by looking at the injury and what Morales was doing, how he was
Hmm.
holding his collarbone area, it's really not hard to make educated guesses that he could have broken his collarbone.
Yeah, that's what it looked like to me.
And a broken collarbone will put you out for an extended period of time. I don't have the average dates in front of me, but we need to prepare ourselves right now to be out to be without Alfredo Morales for an extended period of time. And for a midfield that is so objectively crippled by injury right now, this is just a devastating blow, right?
It is because now you either have to go into a transfer window looking at a center midfielder, or start playing the kids from City 2, which I don't dislike considering where the team is at, the slim chances to make the playoffs. Yeah, mathematically is still possible, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. But I think now is the time to start doing that, playing the kids, giving some of these guys from City 2 some opportunities. But yeah, it just leaves you with no depth at center midfielder, or I guess you play Marcel Hartel more in that position, something that I personally don't like, but you may have to do that or see who else can play that position and fill in the gaps for the time being.
That's that. I mean, you have Tomas Ostrak who can step in, and he did. But I look to right now is you hope Chris Durkin can return quickly in time for the next match, and he doesn't sustain any more injuries. His knee isn't as fragile as we are
Right.
fearing that it could be, and that's where it is, because we don't know the status of Eddie Leuven. We don't or away what to expect, and so from a competitive standpoint, you can't count on him right now, and that's through no fault of his own. That's through no fault of the training staff. Obviously, it's just the nature of the situation. So you look to Chris Durkin to return, but in absence of Chris Durkin, you still have Conrad Wallum, you have Tomas Ostrak, and yeah, Aaron in the chat. Maybe we finally see Miggy. Santi, we don't have time, or we don't have the I don't think wherewithal right now to go into Miguel Perez too much right now. It is noteworthy to me that, again, just like the conversation with JGR was prior to this game, we didn't see JGR at center back. We've had lots of midfield struggles. We've had depth issues with the central midfield. And rather than pull Miguel Perez up to a short-term loan, which you could have done last night, that on Saturday night, you could have brought up Miguel Perez on a short-term loan to fill that gap, a similar gap that Giannis Horn filled in a placeholder role, but we didn't do it. And Miguel Perez could have actually seen action. Now, the one, I think, interesting note now versus what Olaf Melberg had said, which Olaf's comments about short-term loans is if a player has trained with City, then they're a candidate for these kinds of loans. You know, he's willing to play them. He's willing to roster them. And so we were looking at players like Emil Jaskelenin, Brendan McSorley, Makai Joyner, even Tyson Pierce, who was with the team in camp, and Cam Silly. So those kinds of players who had trained with the team under under Olaf, they were fine. Sorry, I was looking in the chat and seeing Edu. But Miguel Perez under David Critchley offers a different perspective in the sense that Critchley was managing City 2. So you would feel like, as in regards to City 2 loans, short-term loans, Critchley has a better understanding than just about anybody in this organization. So a reason or not reason for pulling a City 2 player up, and his choices, whether they fit a profile like Brendan McSorley did, and you used him as such, where you're wanting to sub him in for maybe a Simon Betcher or something, you see the lack of movement on certain players, and you're wondering, does this mean anything? Is there something to read into this in his non-committal or refusal to use a certain player? Is it just the sheer numbers game? Because at this point, you're left wondering, he would value Marcel Hartel deeper in the central midfield versus keeping Hartel higher and rostering Miguel Perez at this point.
Yeah, it's hard to know what the tough process is there, but if there is a time to call him up, it's now. It's just to me, it's baffling like how he had a lot of time in 2023. Obviously, last year he went on loan. Didn't get. I don't think he got the minutes that the team was expecting him to get. But now
Yeah.
back to CD2, and he appeared in preseason, and then the
Hmm.
team changed his designation on the roster profile. So now the only way for him to come is on loan.
Yeah, that's the thing, is keeping in mind the roster nuances to MLS. Miguel Perez currently is no different in that regard from Mekhi Joyner. Both of them have city contracts. So remember that both of them are signed as homegrown players. Both of them are city players. They have contracts. We're not needing to give a contract to Miguel Perez. We're not needing to give a contract to Mekhi Joyner. They have been given their
Hmm.
contracts already. The problem is those designations. It is no different than a season-long loan. Think of it like that. Don't think of it necessarily as roster slot 31 with specific mechanisms behind it. Just think of it as a season-long loan. And if you want to recall him, you can, but only up to 4 times. And he can only appear twice. There are those restrictions that exist for both Miguel Perez and Mekhi Joyner, but they're there. And given our woes and our depth issues in the central midfield, we haven't used it, and I think that's noteworthy to me. Whether or not we will, that's probably going to be something to keep an eye on with the absence, the likely absence of Alfredo Morales long term. That's and you can't plan on that. No, Elliot Meyer, you can't plan on Morales getting hurt, but the idea that you have this depth underneath that and you're ready to go, it exists, whether it's Cam Silly or Miguel Perez. It exists with City too. Do you think it exists to the extent that you're comfortable with either of them playing significant roles, at least in rotation for City? That's what we're going to be seeing. That's the question that we have out there, and that we're going to be seeing a little bit more of, especially if we don't have Leuven, if Durkin remains out. And then going into next season, we're likely without Conrad Wallem. That's too far even to think about with Alfredo Morales, given his age. His contract's up as well with an option. So there are plenty of questions after this season that this kind of really doesn't impact because you're not even sure Alfredo Morales is going to be here next year. You're just needing him desperately for this season right now. Not just the body, the experience, but the leadership that he offers on the field too. Don't forget, that was one of the reasons that we signed him, was because we wanted that leadership on the field. We wanted that experience with the age 35 central midfielder. So anything else we want to say about Alfredo Morales and that injury at this
No,
point?
just have to wait to see what the actual diagnosis is, and see what the team can do from there. And yeah, there are options, but now you're depending on Chris Dorkin recovering, Edward Leuven being available. So I think
Mm-hmm.
still need one more option, and that's where you look at CD2. Doesn't have to be Miguel Perez, could be Cam Silly too, but there are options, and hopefully the team will start looking there.
And not just looking internally, right? The transfer window opens in less than a month now. And I think the team was already looking at the central midfield spot to boost their depth, boost their quality. This just adds that sense of urgency to me. Whether you're saying we still have a chance to make the playoffs, whether you're saying the season's lost, no matter what your perspective is, the central midfield role is something that I think we should be expecting reinforcements with. And this just adds credibility to that expectation in the here and now, but also in the future.
Agreed. That's one of the positions the team should be looking at in the transfer window. So we are a month away. Hopefully, we'll start hearing some rumors in the next few weeks.
But back to this match, and not to keep going on the bad, because we don't want to harp too much on that. We know it passed the eye test for how bad it was, but it was the poor shooting performance and attack in general under Critchley. That was the expected goals number in this one was pretty abysmal, and I think we'd all rather look to the City 2 numbers versus City, because it was 0.31 expected goals against 2.45. So the attack was abysmal. First time that's occurred really under David Critchley. So we just hope that that's an aberration. We hope that that's not the beginning of a trend. And I think at this point, we've seen 3 matches under Critchley where we've vastly overperformed what we've been doing in the attack. This was a step back. So when you look to drawing conclusions and trends, the best we can hope for right now after this Houston Dynamo game is that this was an aberration. This wasn't this wasn't anything that in those 4 previous games under Critchley, San Jose, Portland, Galaxy, and Orlando, where you averaged out 2 goals a game. This was just a bump in the road. We did overperform what our defense was expected to do. Like I mentioned, the 2.45 expected goals from Houston. That was significant, and our ability to lessen the actual goals scored isn't something we had been doing well. So we're still seeing that difficulty and balance, though. I think that's the biggest thing here, and the field tilt plays into that, where David Critchley had called he's consistently called the field tilt one of the most important stats that he wants to win. And per MLS analytics on Blue Sky, we lost that one pretty horribly. 68 to 32% field tilt was won by Houston. And that includes passes into the final third. Houston won that 25-20. Passes in the final third. So once you are in the final third, how many passes do you have within the final third? 112-54. Houston won that. And then passes into the opposition box, 19-9. In addition, there were touches in the opposition box that Houston won 32-13. So this is, I mean, they're significantly winning this field tilt battle. And St. Louis was able to withstand it. But now you're having that completely different dynamic switch where we were doing better in our attack, but we were kind of bleeding goals a little bit more than we were used to. And now we have no attack to speak of in this game, and we're defensively stout. Is it possible to have a balance with this team? Like, what is the core underlying issue that we're not able to find some kind of a balance and raise both of those sides to where we can score goals, but we can also have a strong defensive performance? What is the issue here?
To me, the answer is the center midfield. That's what you need to have that balance. And if you go back, I'm not probably getting ahead, but if you look at the second half, the substitutions that were made, basically it was what was done against Orlando, and then you leave a lot of space for Houston. And you mentioned the defense being really good last night. Roman Berkey deserves a mention there because he kept the team in the game. Yep. He stopped 2 or 3 shots that could have been goals by Houston. So he kept the team in the game. Yeah. Some people mention some issues with his distribution last night, but he kept the team in the game with his saves.
Absolutely. 5 saves and another notable performance by Roman Berkey. That's for sure. On the concept of the central midfield, David Critchley said post-game, quote, "We weren't good enough with our build-up. If we're going to be a team that tries to build and play through opponents or around opponents, the end objective is to always try to create the shot from it, or at least create the ball into the final third." And that for us was the missing piece. We just couldn't break down Houston's block. We couldn't find balls that were breaking lines in order to get players like Klaus and Betcher and Salio, get those guys involved into the attack. And it's not hard to draw a straight line between the inability to build and a lackluster central midfield. The idea of using those players as a pivot, I think JGR even alluded to that post game as well, where that's how you build. If you're wanting to have a successful build, you don't do it by sending the ball long, because that's not a successful build. You don't do it by directly playing the ball through to your wings into a numbers disadvantage very quickly there. You do it through your pivots. There's a reason that these players are called pivots. They direct the play going forward. And we see the attempt a lot of the time where you're having a central midfielder come back. We've complained about it throughout this season, but the lack of creativity and off the ball movement. But having better center backs with the ball allows you to either progress the ball via your center backs, let them move into space, or let them be a little more creative in willing to challenge a defender, willing to challenge one of the attacking players, pressing players of the opposition. And then that opens the space for your central midfield. This can happen, but when you get the ball into the midfield, we just don't have the creativity. We don't have the skill on the ball. And that can be an individual thing, but it can also be a tandem thing where you're having a double pivot. You have 2 6s. You have Conrad Wallem, you have Alfredo Morales, you have Conrad Wallem, you have Akil Watts. And the quality's not there. The creativity's not there. Whether it's game planning, whether it's individual skill, a combination of both, it's not there. And so Critchley's point of we weren't good enough with our buildup does tie directly back to your point. And I couldn't agree with you more that the overarching issue here is the central midfield. And that just goes to reinforce the fact that that may be the most key position. I said, I think a week or two ago, that a DP right winger, right midfielder is of priority. With or without Edu Leuven, you need to bolster your midfield. You need significant reinforcements. If you think Chris Durkin is that player, you need to make sure he's healthy. Otherwise, you need to make sure that you have a player who can step in for him and be as good or better than Chris Durkin, because the central midfield continues to be one of the weakest points in our team. And I think that's really frustrating given how we went into the season.
And injuries are part of the game, but yeah, it's time to look at that position. Hopefully, that's a priority for the transfer window. But yeah, if you don't have that, hard to keep that balance and be good on both ends. And yeah, that's something we have seen this season, like the team being good on defense, but on offense, or the opposite. Under Critchley, the team had a score in his first few games. Yesterday was the first time one of his lineups was held scoreless. The team has been averaging 2 goals per game, but yesterday scoreless and not a lot of chance creation, and you could see that it balanced between defense and offense last night.
Yeah, it was the first goalless match in Critchley's era, and 5 games in, that's noteworthy in how attacking minded his teams have been and how successful we've been in the attack, because in MLS play, Olaf had lost. He had gone goalless in his last 2, and I posted on social media. I think he averaged like 0.87 goals scored per game maybe in the entire season under Olaf. Per game average by Critchley, significantly better. But this, like I said, all we can hope for is that this was an aberration. They learn from this and they get back to their goal scoring ways. Because there's not much in this game other than that defensive performance that was notable. In the first half, the only notable offense was in stoppage time. 2 blocked shots by Celio and Betcher, and you could barely call them shots. I don't think, in looking at that replay, they didn't offer significant danger at all in those shots. And so, yeah, they're on the stat sheet, but it wasn't really anything notable. We had those 2 shots, no shots on target, 0.16 expected goals in the first half. Houston out-touched us in the opposition box 12-6 in the first half. So it was, the first half told the story in a lot of ways. And then the subs started to come in the second half. The halftime subs of Totland and Toyshirt coming in for Zielinski and Wallem were both rotation-based and minutes restrictions. So rotation in the concept of you have 2 matches in 3 days, 2 matches in 4 days, and then minutes restrictions for Conrad Wallem coming back from injury. So Marcel Hartl dropped into the midfield. Cedric Toyshirt took the 10. Thomas Totland took the right back role. It's pretty cut and dry on what we did at that point. Houston made a halftime sub too, so we weren't the only team who did this and prevented a window from being used, because in Major League Soccer and in soccer in general, you make a halftime sub and it's not using one of your 3 available windows to make one of your 5 available subs. At the 66-minute mark, so again, no real attack from St. Louis City. I think there was 1 shot from Klaus in this period of time, but then you fast forward to 66 and you get the goal. It was a transition into the final third. It was a cross in. It was, I think, 2 or 3, maybe 4 crosses in general in this sequence. So you had a transition into the final third on the right side, a cross in. The cross went long. There was a 1v1 battle against Betcher that was won. Totland was folded in closer to goal. The ball was sent long, another cross in from the right, and this is the one that lands in the box. It's found by Andrade, Felipe Andrade, near Berkey, gets the ball back in front of goal for yet another small cross, and then it's Ezequiel Ponce who scores while Wenzel was behind him and calling for an offside. Then, so this is the one moment where I say Michael Wenzel could be at fault, but like you said, Santi, every single player was ball watching, and it happens because there's so many crosses. You're giving so much space out wide to Houston, giving them space to have so many crosses in. If I count in my head, I count at least 3 crosses, 1 from the right, the 1 back from the left, 4 in fact, 1 from the right, 1 back from the left, the big cross in from the right, and then Andrade's mini cross right in front of Berkey to get the ball back in front of net. So defensively, overall in this game, it was fine until it wasn't. And this was a moment where you allow so much space on the wings. You allow Houston to get so many crosses in the box, spreading yourself out, causing you to watch the ball fly back and forth, that it's not hard to see why Wenzel might have lost a player or why they thought that the player was offside when he wasn't. And unfortunately, this was the difference maker.
Yeah, it was, and yeah, too many crosses, and as you mentioned, ball watching. But when I was looking at this play, like it's not like Houston had more numbers; they only had 4 guys in the box, and
Yeah.
City. I counted at least 6, 7 if you count Jay Reed on the left side. So yeah, it's just not acceptable to allow a goal like that, especially after you let the ball go from side to side so many times. So it's something that the team needs to work on, and yeah, good defensive performance before the goal. Obviously, it's then you allowed a goal, and when you're not creating anything on offense, it's hard to lose a game that way. But yeah, just not a good sequence for the team.
No, and unfortunately, that is the difference maker. That's the hallmark of this match, is that one sequence. St. Louis didn't get their first shot on target in until stoppage time of the second half. We saw some subs that are noteworthy in the fact that they were used, I guess. Jean de Silva came in at 67 for Celio Pompeu, and I believe this might have been the first time he was subbed in
I
on the
think
left
so.
side. He had been subbed in almost exclusively on the right side up until then, as a sub. That saying. 72 minutes, we brought in Tomas Ostrak for Jay Reed. This moved Akil Watts back to left back. And so this is where we go back to the conversation earlier about Giannis Horn, where you're comfortable having Akil Watts play left back. And so Horn was basically there as window dressing almost. Tomas Ostrak rather joined Marcel Hartl in the midfield. And so that became our double pivot of sorts, where you're obviously with Marcel Hartl in the midfield, he's not going to play a 6. He's going to be that roaming player who has freedom to do whatever he wants on the field, going from the left to the right side, front to back, whatever he needs to. And he's given that freedom and flexibility because he's earned it. He's a smart player. He's a talented player. He's arguably our best quality player on the ball. And that leaves Tomas Ostrak as your pivot, as your 6. And Tomas Ostrak is a good central midfielder. I think he's given us a lot of reason to be excited for him deeper in the midfield. Whereas he came on to St. Louis City as an attacking midfielder, a 10, a winger with City 2 when he first came on back in 2022. But he's not a big body. He's not a number 6 who can either play strong defensively or and he hasn't shown the ability to really open up a lot of space as a single pivot. So I like Tomas Ostrak as a box-to-box midfielder. I like him in concept as a 6 in the sense that he's really quality on the ball, but we just haven't seen a lot of success or reason to be confident that he should be our number 6 going forward when you're paired with Marcel Hartl, especially. And this is just a continuation of the issue of bringing Marcel Hartl deeper into your central midfield. Is if you're bringing Hartl deeper into your central midfield, you need a strong 6, whether it's a guy like JGR, who's exclusively a central defensive midfielder. You need to have that body physically on the defensive side and whose quality on the ball to be able to have more of a traditional pivot, allowing Hartl to free up and move front to back. That's something that we don't have really. We might have had it with Jabulu Blom back in the day, but that ship has sailed. That ship has long sailed, and we are not going to see Jabulu Blom. If you don't remember how he left his tenure with St. Louis, it was, I think, in the Juarez game in the League's Cup last season, where he refused to come off the bench to support his team taking penalty kicks. And it was under John Hackworth. That was the last time we saw Jabulu Blom. He's not coming back. He's not an option at the 6. We need a better option in central midfield, and this just further reinforces that story. Later on, 77-minute sub, Kyle Hebert came in for JGR, like for like, no real story there. Any other notables you really have in this game, much less the second half?
No. It was disappointing game. Not much action. I wonder if this .31 xG is the lowest we have ever had. Not sure if you knew that from the top of your head.
Ooh, that's something I can get you here in just a second. It's a really fascinating question. Now, ever in 2020, because if I'm looking back at our harken back to the Diego game, second game of the season, where it was just an absolute 0.1 xG. Remember that game where I think Ben
Yeah, I
started
forgot about that game. Yeah.
away? Everybody wanted to forget about that game because we had no game. This was, speaking, our third worst performance in 2025 games. Not surprising at all. Like I mentioned, San Diego. Any guesses as to what the other game was that was a lower xG? And if I can jog your memory, Klaus was very heated towards the end of this game, potentially against the other team's manager.
Oh, yeah, the game against Philadelphia.
Yeah, that's the one, Philadelphia. So the 1-0 loss, which was, if we remember that, an abysmally performed attack. So this is right in line with that, just below or just ahead, I guess, depending on how you look at it, of Philadelphia and San Diego, and right there next to Minnesota and Austin. So a really poor performance that, put in context, does line up with the eye test on some of those. Now, as far as where we go from here, because I think that's about all we can say about this match. We're 20 games into the season now. St. Louis sits 14th still with 15 points in 20 matches. That's a 0.75 points per game. And like we've said, to make the playoffs, you would expect to need around 1.3. That's a benchmark that you can keep in your head of average performance, 1.3 points per game. If we get around that, we're in the playoff hunt, seriously in the playoff hunt. If we're ahead of that, we're probably a lock for the playoffs. You can look to Colorado and Austin right now, who are in 8th and 9th place, respectively, at 1.3 points per game. Like, that's the benchmark, not just this season, but historically. And we are at 0.75. So 3 wins, 11 losses, 6 draws. We go forward at this point, do we want to talk about the playoff hopes? Do we want to talk about anything regarding that? Because the other conversation related to that is, what's the point of this season? And we will go into this in depth later this week when we have our longer show. But as we wrap up this weekend and we're sitting in 14th place, just 6 points ahead of the LA Galaxy and 4 points behind Real Salt Lake, what is the thought of what this game means for the season?
Well, we're 20 games into the season. You mentioned that 1.3 benchmark. To get there, we're now looking at an average of 2 points per game territory, which is going to be difficult. Mathematically, it's possible next game, but that's the thing. Like, yesterday, was one of those 6-point games. Another one coming against Real Salt Lake, and I think that's the one. Like, if the team is not successful, I think we can start just thinking about 2026, and that's when you start seeing players that maybe have not had opportunities. But for now, I think Real Salt Lake should be a priority, and see what happens after that.
That's the big thing. If you don't remember our conversation from last week before, we have 6 matches, or had 6 matches in the back half of the season against teams directly in front of us in the playoff hunt. It was Houston, Dallas, and Real Salt Lake. 2 matches against each of those teams, and all 3 of those teams are in the way between us and the playoffs. And we said, if we have any hope of making the playoffs, those are the must-win matches. We could suffer losses against Portland, against Minnesota, Nashville, and Chicago, especially because they're cross-conference rivals of sorts. But it was these teams. It's Houston, it's Dallas, and it's Real Salt Lake. If you want to make the playoffs, you have to win, or at least get a point away from those teams, every single one of those matches. And we didn't do it. So now we have 5 matches left. Next week against Real Salt Lake, like you said, Santi, is in the crosshairs of a must-win game. And this is an away game against Real Salt Lake. And the term must-win game is thrown around all over the place. It's tossed around in April, in May. In my opinion, it's tossed around much earlier than it deserves credit for. But after the loss against Houston, given where we are in the standings, given the fact we have 14 games left, who is still in front of us, and the fact that we're 4 points behind RSL for 13th place, and we are 11 points behind Austin in the playoff hunt, 11 points with 14 games left. This is a must-win game. And I would not fault anyone for saying we're already out of the playoff hunt and that playoffs are a lost cause. Even though mathematically it's still possible, like you said, wouldn't fault anybody for saying that. I might even myself toss that phrase around that, we're out of the playoffs. Like, it's not feasible for this team to expect to do what they need to do. At the same time, there is still a direct path forward. It just involves winning or getting points in all 5 of those games. Against Real Salt Lake, after Real Salt Lake on July 5th, we have Portland and then Dallas and then Minnesota for our conference games before Nashville and Chicago. We can stand to lose points against Portland. We can stand to lose points against Minnesota. But if we want to climb over the teams, eke into the playoffs, you got to get a win against RSL. I don't see any two ways around that.
Win against RSL and win against Portland just because it is a home game. And even if you win those 5 games against the regular opposition, you still need a few more wins to get in the conversation. So yeah, we're into that territory. I think that game against RSL, that's it. The must-win game, that's the one. If the team doesn't win, I think we kind of start talking about the chances just not being there. And yeah, you can win out. That has happened sometimes. Very few times that teams all of the sudden get on these streaks and get better. But I don't think I don't think we're looking at that.
So not to add fuel to the fire of how difficult this is, but the stat, and I mentioned this on X and Blue Sky before we recorded, the difficulty of winning away and why I say that objectively a 1-0 loss wasn't awful. We talked ad nauseum about the nuances to that, but as it relates to going away to Real Salt Lake, there's an article that ESPN had a while back that said between 2015 and 2021, away teams in MLS won just 24% of the time compared to 31% of the time in the best leagues across the pond and 29% of the time in other North and South American leagues. And then it got worse in 2022, right before St. Louis entered. So this is a league where you can expect, historically speaking, to win less than 1 out of 4 away games. And St. Louis has only won 1 away game. You remember last season's difficulty. We didn't win an away game until the very end of the season. So to ask St. Louis to win a must-win game away in the form that they're in right now, with the depth and squad issues that we're having, it's a Herculean task, but it's one that has to be done if these players want to continue to be able to talk about the playoffs. I feel the need to reinforce just how difficult it is. MLS teams winning away 24% of the time, historically speaking, because putting into context just how difficult this is going to be, it's important to note. I mean, as well as how to feel about this 1-0 loss in context of just the abysmal attacking performance, but remembering the sheer difficulty of winning away in MLS.
Yeah, and I get that, and that's why you have to get the job done at home too. And City hasn't done that. There are 7 games left at home, so that's 21 points. But that even if you win all of those, you still need to get a few results away. And what a better way to do it than against a direct opponent. So I think this is the game. This is there have been other must-win games that have been mentioned, but I think this is it.
21 available points at home would put us at 41. I'm sorry, it would put us at 36 points.
Yeah, not enough.
Which is not enough. You would need to win every single home game and still take let's just toss out 2 wins on the road to potentially have a chance to make the playoffs. That's the perspective that we're in. With that said, I never want to end a show on a bad note, on a sour note. So I'm going to circle back because I don't have anything new to add. I'm going to circle back and say that in the context of our depth issues, in the context of our struggles on the back line and defensively, JGR was the bright spot. Michael Wenzel had himself a quality game as well, but JGR not only showing that he can play the center back role for St. Louis in his first opportunity given, the trust given by David Critchley could be the other part of this positive spin. Is David Critchley still going outside the box from what other managers and how players had been played prior to his arrival. So the fact that he's willing to go with JGR and Michael Wenzel, the youngest center back pairing that we've ever had for St. Louis, in one player in his first time appearing at center back since being on the team for almost a year, that's something positive to take as well. Not just the performance by JGR and Michael Wenzel, but Critchley's willingness to play these players. Whether you see this as a positive or negative, I don't know. We might have seen the last of Josh Yaro, like, to be quite honest. Josh Yaro seems to have fallen so far down the depth chart that those other facts are true. You're playing Michael Wenzel in his first start of 2025. You're moving JGR from the midfield to center back role, something that Critchley did for the first time, is that JGR has been on this team, as opposed to playing Josh Yaro. What that means for his future, for even the next few games, as we probably still continue to struggle with center back depth, yet to be seen. But nothing in this match made me say that I wouldn't be comfortable or decently confident by having JGR and Michael Wenzel as our two center backs against RSL, against Portland. I think that's something that we need to keep in mind, that boosts our depth in those areas by having JGR as an option there, because he wasn't being used consistently as a central midfielder. He was coming on late in games and he was having more and more appearances, yes, but he wasn't a starter. He wasn't a regular starter. He was depth. And so if we can move him from depth at central midfield to a starting center back, given our issues, and have him excel with like a 97% accurate passing, leading the team in touches, and I think that is the benefit to look at going forward.
Yeah, I hope to see more of JGR at center back, just considering the availability, and also considering that's what he was playing before. He had shown some good things at central midfielder. He was getting more confidence every time he got more minutes, but even himself, he said it like, "Hey, you guys have to remember, I was a center back when I got here." So yeah, that's a positive, and I think he deserves another opportunity, and we'll see what happens against RSL in that must-win game.
And we will be keeping a close eye on training this week to see if and when Henry Kessler returns, if and when Timo Baumgartel returns, because that's going to play directly into JGR's usage at center back as well. Stay tuned to Flyover Footy for all of that information. We're going to bring it to you as we see it in training, and we'll be back later this week to talk about training, about the preview of Real Salt Lake. For now, thank you for joining us on Flyover Fallout. My name is Matt Baker, joined as always by Santiago Beltran. We appreciate you jumping on with us, whether you're in the live stream or whether you're listening to us on our podcast. And if you have any questions for us, feel free to reach out. Our DMs are open, and we're always happy to chat and engage and just talk city, even during this kind of a stretch. Thank you for joining us on this look at the 1-0 loss against Houston Dynamo. And stay tuned for us later this week. For now, have a good day, and we'll talk to you later.
Vamos City.
All right. Thanks everybody for joining us. We appreciate it. It's not easy to wake up on a Sunday and talk about this from your perspective as fans. Like, we thank you so much for like choosing to listen to us talk about St. Louis City after this kind of a match. I mean, you talk about MLS sickos, you talk about the diehard of the diehardest. That's you guys. If you're seeing our faces right now, if you're listening to us, we thank you so much for that, because it means a lot. And it gets us up doing this on Sunday morning. So we really appreciate it. And hopefully we have better news to talk about later this week, and especially next week as we look to do it again. And maybe we'll get a better result for 4th of July.
I hope so.
Take care, guys.